Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan and S. Pierce. I just wanted to give you a little bit of an insight into my experience last night. So, as some of you might know, I went out last night to a localish pub with some friends of my partners, and we went to some kind of ABBA pair of women singing ABBA songs, and it was fine. We had good fun. Not my cup of tea, but we had a really nice time. Drank a skinful. Had to be helped out the pub because my legs don't work because my MS. Down into this taxi that was waiting for us to take us back, and as I was kind of negotiating myself into the taxi, this voice was like, "Oh, are you okay? Can I help you?" I was like, "Oh no, I'm fine. Thank you very much." "Oh, mate, where are you from?" He went, "Oh, Romania," and I just switched straight into ATP Geopolitics mode, like skinful of beer and wine and having a good time. Straight into Romania. Do you know Nick? What do you think of Nikashur Dan? Right, because that's how cool I am. And the taxi driver's big fella, Romanian, obviously, just said, and he was like, "Oh," and we had started driving off by at this stage. He was like, "Oh, Nikashur Dan, Sorbonne, blah blah blah," and I was like, within 5 seconds. I had pigeonholed this guy, and it was entirely correct. And the conversation was fascinating, but quite depressing at the same time. So this chap was not a fan of Nikashur Dan at all, who was a recently elected premier of Romania, who was a former mayor, and he's a kind of centrist, liberal, pro Ukraine, pro EU guy. And the guy I was speaking to, I was like, "Oh, what do you think of Carlin Georgescu, the the right wing mentalist who basically he was running for president, and then they cancelled the elections because of Russian interference, so on and so forth." Anyway, this guy was the taxi driver was singing his praises type thing. And I was like, seriously. And then we got talking. It's only a short 10-minute drive home, but we got onto all sorts, talking about Ukraine, talking about sort of Russia and Ukraine, and my goodness, his views were depressingly pro-Russian. I mean, the guy could have been an internet troll sitting in the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg. It was absolutely fascinating. My partner, who was equally had a skinful, sitting in the back listening to this all, just as we got out, it's interesting. Like her views, are like, oh my goodness. Um, but I was really pressing him on stuff, and it got pretty heated. But I kept it, convivial, and I was pretty genial about it. But it was. I mean, the man had pretty unjustified opinions. So, we're talking about Ukraine, and he was like, "Oh, Victoria Nuland." I was like, "Oh my god, okay, here goes." So he was saying, "Oh, the Ukrainians are just sort of Russians," and all the typical kind of Russian propaganda points. And I was like, "Hang on, mate. So are you saying that you get to dictate who Ukrainians are?" Like, I've been to Ukraine. I've spoken to thousands of Ukrainians. Have you? I didn't want to be too patronized, but I was like, you know, I said, do you know who gets to say who Ukrainians are? It's the Ukrainians. Like, I can't dictate to them whether they're Russian or Ukrainian. You can't. They've got a separate language. They've got a separate culture. They're telling you that they are Ukrainian. You don't get to dictate that, mate. And it was absolutely fascinating. Then he was. I got onto the topic of kind of Russia's role and Ukraine. So I was saying, like, and I asked him straight up. I said, "Look, mate, do you know how many times in modern history that Ukraine have invaded another country around them, a neighboring country or any country really? Can you tell me how many times?" "Okay, I'll tell you, it's zero." "Can you tell me how many times in the last, I don't know, 30 years that Russia have invaded countries around them?" Because we can talk Georgia a couple of times. We can talk Chechnya, two Chechen wars. We can talk Moldova, Transnistria. And by the way, Georgia, we've got South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And we've got Ukraine in 2014, 2022. And you're telling me the so on and so forth. And this went on for 10 minutes, but it was pretty depressing that within the UK, you would think you would have a Romanian taxi driver who would be at least a little bit more understanding, a little bit more pro kind of, I guess, European and pro Ukraine. But this guy was not that. And I would love to have sat down and had a proper, like, 2 hour discussion with him in a pub over a quiet pint. Probably wouldn't have been quiet because I'm fairly sure most of his positions were unjustified. Now, I'm no expert on Romania. Like, I can't tell him how to feel about Romania, and but I'd be really interested to see what his justification was behind his position on Romanian politics, and yeah, and for him to flesh out his true beliefs on Ukraine. I mean, as far as I could work out, this guy was just very pro-Russian, and as soon as anyone pulls out the Victoria Nuland card, the idea that the US and NATO were involved in some kind of coup in 2014. I mean, it's ridiculous. The Euromaidan protests were carried out by young, predominantly at the beginning, young Ukrainians, joined by many more who had a real sense of the direction of travel of Ukraine, and not being fans of Yanukovych's direction towards Russia. And so that wasn't, John McCain and Victoria Nuland weren't standing in the Euromaidan Square with the protesters. They weren't taking sniper shots from the Ukrainian internal services. This was not a Western coup, and the people who say that are those who are under the influence of the Russian propagandists and Russian narrative. But it was just fascinating going from talking about going to see some bands in November with our friends, and like, which band should we go and see? Should we go to this like 90s music festival thing? And then go, I'll see you guys later. I had a wonderful night. Thanks, guys. Get into the taxi. It's like, oh, you're Romanian. Right. Nick us your Dan. That's my life. My life is, geopolitics. How can we shift the conversation onto that? But it's pretty depressing because, it's always depressing, these kind of conversations, because you assume, you project, or at least I do. I project myself onto others. So I think, I'm a decent, rational guy, as we all think we are, and so therefore you are, and you're obviously going to be pro-Ukrainian, and you're Romanian. Okay, interesting. So you're living in the UK. You're going to be a somewhat liberal sort of outward looking guy, having come to the UK. Oh no, you are essentially some kind of KGB agent, some kind of FSB agent. No, but and obviously people are entitled to their different political opinions as long as they're justified. People are only entitled to opinions, as far as I'm concerned, as far as they can justify those opinions. Otherwise, I'll say the moon is made of cheese, and I'm not entitled to that opinion. Like, I don't like this idea that, everyone's entitled to their opinion no matter what it is. No. Entitlement, I think, comes with justification, and I he's entitled to his opinion about Ukraine as much as he can justify it. And unfortunately, a 10-minute taxi ride didn't give us a chance. It's certainly in my drunken state to flesh out that side of things. So I don't know. Maybe I'm going to call some more taxis just until I get the right one. And then say, right, you're driving me to London, mate. It's going to be very expensive, but I want to hear you. I want to hear your opinions. Anyway, that was last night. Every night of mine seems to circle back round to Ukraine in some kind of way. Right, on with the hits and losses video.